Attorney General William Barr releasing a 4-page summary of Robert Mueller's findings and setting the stage for the next political battle in Washington. A growing debate now playing out on when exactly lawmakers and the American public will see the full Mueller report. Joining me now is Trey Gowdy, former chairman of the House Oversight Committee and a Fox News contributor. So there has been this debate about how could somebody like Bill Barr actually read a 300-page document and summarize it in 48 hours. You tell me, you're a lawyer. That's possible, right?
It's more than possible. I mean, he's actually a smart lawyer. I'm not. I probably could read 300 pages in a weekend, but Bill Barr definitely can. And, you know, it's not like you're summarizing something that's really complicated. Do you have sufficient evidence upon which to charge people with conspiracy, collusion, coordination, whatever you want to call it? And then the other summary, which people oftentimes forget about, what did Russia do to this country in 2016? He summarized it. I'm quite certain he read it. He's a really, really smart guy, which is something that should give all of us confidence. 300 pages is not that much.
Do you? I understand some Democrats' point that if the shoe were on the other foot, right, would you, when you were back on the committee, would you have accepted a 4-page summary from Eric Holder, for example, without further information? And you would probably demand all of the report as well?
I would try, but I would also understand, as I did, when Eric Holder and James Cole, his DAG, wouldn't even answer questions. I mean, keep in mind, Dana, the Department of Justice speaks in indictments. They don't write biographies. They don't write reports on people. They don't do Oppo research. They issue indictments. So if I were to ask Eric Holder or DAG James Cole, why didn't you indict this person? They wouldn't answer the question. They
don't have to answer it. It's a great point. Also yesterday, the House Republicans on the Intelligence Committee banded together and they said that Adam Schiff, the chairman of the Intel Committee on the Democratic side, that he should resign. Here's a response from Congressman Ro Khanna. Listen to this.
Adam Schiff shouldn't resign. Look, we have a separation of powers. That's part of the Constitution. You have strong oversight. And the president who can stand up to Xi Jinping can take Congress's oversight or a robust press. So let's move on. Let's figure out things we can come together on. We know the Russians interfered. Put aside President Trump. I was talking to Kevin McCarthy. I said, how do we prevent further interference?
What do you make of the Republicans asking Adam Schiff to resign?
Well, Dana, it's hard to get on the House Intelligence Committee, at least on the Republican side. Paul and Kevin don't pick members of the bomb-throwing caucus or the crazy caucus. I mean, you've got Elise Stefanik, who's a national security expert, Mike Conaway, former chairman of ethics, Will Hurd, who was a CIA employee, Johnny Radcliffe, a U.S. attorney, terrorism expert. I mean, these are not members of the bomb-throwing caucus. And for them to say, Adam Schiff, we have lost confidence in your leadership, I'll tell you, I think what's going to happen next, Dana, is the intelligence community is going to say, you know what, Adam, you disregard the information that you're provided. You prejudge the outcome of investigations. You have the president not just indicted, but in jail. We're going to stop sharing information with you. If you are the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee and you can't act in a reasonable way, we're going to stop sharing information with you, in which case Pelosi will have no choice but to replace Schiff. And look, the next in line is Jim Himes, who's every bit as progressive. He's just a lot more reasonable than Adam Schiff
maybe responsible with information. I have one last quick question for you. There was this text message that was revealed from Page, of course, remember Lisa Page, to McCabe on the 12th of December of 2016, saying, by the way, DNI James Clapper told Pete that he, Clapper, was meeting with the CIA director and his deputy for dinner tonight. Just FYI, basically, for your situational awareness. And McCabe says, OK. Thoughts on that? We've been waiting to find out what was this insurance policy that they were talking about.
Yeah, we actually looked into that, Dana. I think it's really important. That was December of 2016, right?
Yes. Yes.
Which is exactly when the intelligence community was drafting their assessment. Remember, they released an assessment of what happened in 2016, and Brennan insisted that the dossier material be included in the assessment. Therefore, when it's leaked, the public has information about the dossier in great detail. So we looked into that meeting. I don't think we found anything untoward with that dinner. But Brennan was an active participant in disseminating this dossier information in the fall of 2016 to put a cloud over the president before he ever became president.
Right. Trey Gowdy, it's a pleasure to have you as a Fox News contributor. We appreciate you coming on today. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Out of this breaking letter just sent by the Attorney General William Barr to leaders in both parties up on Capitol Hill include that he's planning to release some version of the Mueller report by mid-April or sooner, the Attorney General says. He adds that this report is roughly 400 pages. It sounds a little longer than the 300 pages or so we heard about. And then an important point where he says that although the president, quote, would have the right to assert executive privilege over certain parts of the report, he has stated publicly he intends to defer to me, and accordingly, there are no plans to submit the report to the White House for a privilege review. So that's important, since Democrats have been suggesting that the White House may have time to scrub this, that maybe they were going to try to cover up some details. Let's bring in our chief White House correspondent, John Roberts. React to that privilege question, John, if you will, and what else is standing out in this letter for you?
It's a very important point, and it's actually somewhat surprising, because I was told all along as we were getting close to the release of the Barr summary of the Mueller report findings that in order to get the Mueller report out in any kind of form, it would likely have to involve some sort of review between Attorney General Barr and Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein and Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, and Emmett Flood, who is the in-house counsel here at the White House, on the Mueller investigation, because you have an awful lot of materials in there that would be subject to executive privilege, not the least of which is the transcript of some 30 hours of conversations between Robert Mueller's investigators and Don McGahn, who is the former White House counsel. And then, because there was all this transparency from the White House, which was the suggestion of John Dowd and Ty Cobb, you have thousands, tens of thousands, really, of documents that are in-house White House communications, interagency communications, interpersonal communications, most of which would be subject to executive privilege. And you would think that the White House would want to check to make sure that whoever was reviewing this would be very prudent about what is and is not released. But it would appear, according to the Attorney General, that the president has turned all of the reins of that over to the Attorney General to make the decision, and the White House counsel's office will not be involved here at all, which is really putting a tremendous, tremendous amount of faith in an individual that the president doesn't really know all that well. I mean, he knows of Bill Barr's reputation. He thinks he's a stellar individual, but it's not the White House counsel. And so I think the president here is, I don't want to say he's taking a risk or he's making a gamble, but he is putting an awful lot of faith in the Department of Justice to thoroughly scrub this thing to make sure that no items that are subject to executive privilege that the White House would not want out there don't get out there.
Yeah, John, important point you make, because about a week ago, as you know, there were reports circulating that the president in private was asking people, phoning them, what do you know about Barr? What do you know about this guy? That maybe he was a little nervous that he didn't know what the letter was going to say that was summarizing the Mueller report. That has now come out, obviously, and the president, we know from his public comments, is pretty positive, pretty high on both the Attorney General and the letter, suggesting that he was cleared at least on collusion. And there's a debate, as you know, coming on what exactly the full Mueller report says about the allegations of obstruction. So jump in on that point.
And because this has just come out, I haven't had a chance to check with Rudy Giuliani and Jay Sekulow, who are the president's outside counsel. I know that they would love to see this report before it's made public or sent to Congress. They know that they're likely not going to see it. And now Barr has said that the White House is not going to be consulted at all about this. But I suspect that Rudy Giuliani may have concerns about the fact that the White House counsel's office is not going to look at this. I mean, particularly when you consider Rod Rosenstein's involvement in signing those FISA warrants way back when this investigation was getting going. Now, having Rosenstein still there through this process is political insulation for the president. But again, the president is putting an awful lot of faith and trust in Bill Barr. But I would assume that because of his stellar reputation, Barr is going to go through this thing with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that nothing is released publicly that shouldn't be out there. And, you know, you're talking about intimate conversations between the president and his top aides. That's stuff that you want to not get out into the public domain.
Absolutely. Excellent reporting from our chief White House correspondent, John Roberts. Stand by, John. We're going to get back to you in a moment. I want to bring in Chris Wallace, Fox News Sunday host. We were talking a moment ago. We had an inkling this might be coming out any moment now. So I appreciate you tap dancing with me a little bit. This is a 2-page letter, so it's pretty brief. And what stands out for you, Chris?
Well, it strikes me as an eminently reasonable offer, or not really an offer, a declaration by the Attorney General. The fact is that the report was only given to at 5 o'clock a week ago, so 7 days ago, to Bill Barr. He then summarized it on Sunday. The idea that he was going to be able to make the whole report public, having dealt with all the issues, as you pointed out, about grand jury testimony, intelligence information, that he'd be able to do that by this Tuesday in about 9 days seemed like a reach. As I say, I think it seems like a pretty reasonable position for the Attorney General to take, and particularly as you and John have been talking about, the fact that the White House is not going to get a look at the report before Congress does or the public does. Having said that, my guess is that the Democrats are going to say it's an offer they can't accept, and that they will say, well, there's already had been talk that, if they didn't turn it over right away, it was a cover-up, that there's a scrubbing. Yes, the White House counsel isn't going to take a look at it, but the president's appointee, the Attorney General, is going to take a look at it, and he's going to be able to make decisions. So I suspect Republicans are going to say, gee, this is pretty generous, this is pretty reasonable, pretty transparent, and Democrats are going to label it a cover-up or a delay, even though we're only talking about a matter of a couple of weeks.
Right. Chris, I want to get to the details of the letter again, but first I want to stay on your point because it's important. Of course, the Attorney General serves at the pleasure of the president. He was nominated by this president, but when Democrats over the last few days have been suggesting that he's sort of a pawn of the president, and in the words of Chuck Schumer yesterday, he said that Bill Barr is delaying the release of the Mueller report. The fact that this letter does a number of things says, A, as Attorney General, I'm going to get a big chunk of this 400-page report out by mid-April. B, he's willing to testify May 1st, May 2nd before the Senate and the House, the Attorney General. And C, I'm not giving the White House a look beforehand. Does it make it harder for Democrats to claim this is some kind of a cover-up?
It may make it harder, but it doesn't make it impossible. And I will predict that they're going to say, we don't want to see Bill Barr's version of this report. We want to see, I'm just telling you what I think predict their action is going to be. We want to see the full report. We not only want to see the full report, we want to see all of the underlying documents, all the investigations, all the interviews with witnesses. They're going to fight for transparency. Look, regardless of the fact that I think the Democrats are going to try to move off this to some degree and get to other issues like health care and equal pay and education, they see it a political advantage to continuing to hammer the president on various investigations. And the floor of the House will pass some legislation, probably go nowhere in the Senate, but you're also going to see folks like Adam Schiff and Elijah Cummings and Jerry Nadler continue to investigate the president. And, they're not, I promise you what they're not going to say. This is a great idea. Thank you, Bill Barr. We're satisfied with this. No more questions. I promise that's not the tack they're going to take on this.
That seems a safe assumption. I want to run something else past you by Chris. As you were talking, I was going through the letter. About midway through, Bill Barr pushes back on a letter from the Democrat, Jerry Nadler, who had suggested that the letter of last weekend was a quote-unquote 4-page summary of the special counsel's review. Bill Barr writes to the Democrats and Republicans, my March 24 letter of last Sunday was not and did not purport to be an exhaustive recounting of the special counsel's investigation or report. As my letter made clear, my notification to Congress and the public provided, pending release of the report, a summary of its principal conclusions, that is, its bottom line. He goes on to say it's 400 pages, Chris. That could be aimed at the Democrat saying, look, your narrative is not true about me trying to cover this up. But, Chris, it could also be aimed at Republicans who have been celebrating, right? In the sense of, look, folks, I was not saying this is done. I gave you 4 pages. There's a whole lot more in here.
Listen, you had Robert Mueller on the issue of collusion. He basically gave the president, at least according to what we know from Barr, and I can't imagine that Barr mischaracterized it, because if so, my guess is Robert Mueller would have cried foul, that he basically gave him a clean bill of health on the issue of collusion, that there was no cooperation, coordination between either President Trump and the campaign and the Kremlin and the Russia. So on that, he gave him a clean bill of health. Obviously, it was a much more mixed bill of health when it came to obstruction. And, you had that quote, pretty interesting quote, that Barr quoted from Mueller saying, you know, there's there's not enough to charge a crime, but there's also not enough to exonerate the president. There is going to be some stuff that I think it's obvious in these 400 pages that the White House isn't going to like. And that's why I think, you know, call it exoneration now and take your victory lap and say we want to have accountability for all the people who got over their skis and saying that there was collusion. But they're going to have to deal with some stuff. There's no question about it when we see the whole report or as much of it as we end up seeing.